I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to Michael Roy, better known as the artist Birdcap. So stay with us for a conversation with Michael. Michael, thanks for being here.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
And we are, for people listening, we are still in the Crosstown atrium after the flooding of the Daily Memphian world headquarters a month ago. And I'm actually now growing used to it, and we'll probably have some construction people come through, and we'll have some maintenance folks, and there'll be noise and dogs, and it's all just fine. So, let's just start real background for people who maybe aren't familiar with you. Describe your work, which is with your work is going to be fascinating. So I'm very interested, and where people maybe have seen it in Memphis and elsewhere.
I'm a muralist, cartoonist, illustrator. I do kind of whimsical characters that are hopefully experiencing different stages of grief and anxieties that are underscored by the aesthetic. But a lot of my work is known in town from murals. I have a few pieces downtown and in Midtown and here at Crosstown up the red stairs. It's probably one of the easier to find. The big,
as people come up the red to the, well, I guess it depends on which side, but left or right.
Yeah.
And so you've been working in, your stuff's amazing. Your stuff is really cool. Like I've seen your stuff around town. It was on your website. It is also incredibly intricate. Like some of it in detailed, and I'm going to not have the vocabulary to describe it well, but it's, for those who haven't seen it, they need to seek it out because it's very, very cool.
Appreciate you.
How did you end up in this style? Let's start with that, because you also have done smaller things, right? It's not all murals, but the style seems to be a kind of similar in some form or fashion.
Right. I was working as a spot illustrator for a couple of magazines and a newspaper in South Korea about, 12 years ago now. And I noticed over a couple of years of doing these illustrations with these tight deadlines that I started using sort of like shorthand for different ways of illustrating eyes or faces or products. And when I became cognizant of that, I thought if I really pushed that and tried consciously using these for shortened things, maybe it could be an interesting style that'd be unique to me because it kind of came out of the unconscious. And that's around the same time I started getting into graffiti, and I started taking those like shorthand illustrations out to the streets. And that kind of really became the beginning of Birdcap in that career. And you grew up in what I think you say the bayous of Mississippi. That's true.
Unincorporated sort of.
Yeah, a designated census area.
Yeah.
It's called Escataba. Between Pascagoula and Biloxi.
And then went to South Korea at a pretty young age.
I graduated from the Memphis College of Arts with a degree in painting and printmaking with a minor in Italian postmodernism. So I was awesome. Unemployed. And so I worked as a ditch digger for about 6 months on the Gulf Coast and realized you can go teach English with any sort of bachelor's degree. And so I went to South Korea originally to teach English. And then from there, I was able to change my visa to become an art teacher. And from there, an illustrator for some magazines.
How long did you teach?
I taught probably 2 out of the 4 years. I was in Korea 4 years.
Okay. Did you speak any? You didn't go there speaking any Korean, I assume.
I went there not speaking any Korean.
Okay.
I speak a little bit now.
A little bit, yeah. What was that experience like?
It was incredible. Growing up where I come from, Memphis was the largest city I'd ever seen. I'd never traveled abroad, and suddenly I was like in a city larger than New York.
Yeah.
It was extremely rewarding. It was some of the best memories of my life.
And obviously home to an amazing amount of anime and illustrations and its own sort of, Japan as well, and so, but Korea has its own thing.
It has its own thing for sure. And Korean street art is really unique to me, and it was really figurative and really bright and colorful and kind of dominated these abandoned city areas in town. They would shut down entire blocks and rebuild them at a time. Seoul grew so fast. It was like one of the poorest nations in the world post 1953 and was in the G20 by the 90s. Yeah. So with that kind of growth, you have all these like apartment complexes shutting down so they could build new ones to like match the growth.
Yeah.
And so those areas would become kind of street art havens, and I fell in love with it there.
Was it, I don't want to say illegal, but was it approved street art? I mean, or was it, yeah, sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't?
It was illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, like in Memphis now, there's through Urban Art and through Paint Memphis and through other folks, there's a tremendous amount of cool urban street art that is murals that is not only allowed, but encouraged and so on.
Right. The scene's changed. When I was starting, muralism hadn't blown up. It hadn't become something that you could get endorsements from, or now brands want to collaborate with street art and graffiti because there's a tinge of cool to it.
Yeah.
There's a way of looking, a certain aesthetic that comes with it. But that wasn't existent when I started. So it was a great scene because there was no financial motivation in it. So if you were in it, you had to be, I don't know, dumb might not be the right word, but there was something
Naive,
there was
maybe,
something romantically pure about it.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. And for that kind of stuff, kind of obscure question here, but if you knew it was maybe in a construction zone or somewhere that was going to be, did you just take a lot of photos of it because you knew it wasn't going to last?
It was all about the receipt. And to this day, it's all about the receipt. At the end of the day, painting outside is sand painting. It doesn't matter how much money you put into the protection of it. A mural is not copper. A mural does not last forever. And so you take photos. And at the beginning, it was trying to get that photo. You maybe have to go back the next day if you painted it at night, and you show it to your 6 friends who do the same kind of dumb thing you do. And if they liked it, then your week was good.
Yeah.
And if they didn't care for it, you had to go back out and try again.
And give or take, what year was this? You were in South Korea?
I was in South Korea, I think from like 2010 to 2014, something like that.
So beginning of social media, getting bigger, and did that become a thing that suddenly there was another place where you could put things on Instagram or whatever?
I owe a lot of my career, I think, to like being able to get an audience on social media before social media got really saturated and really
sad,
difficult,
angry, and
I'm sure it was all those things too. But it just connected at the right time. I was lucky enough to be part of a movement that sort of got monetized at the right moment.
Yeah. Again, we're talking to Michael Roy, better known as Birdcap, the artist Birdcap. Now when you're doing stuff, you're talking, I mean, is more of what you're doing, is it, I don't even know if this is the right term, is it commissioned? Is it a mix of commissioned and what you want to do for yourself? You
do as many commissions as you can so you can do what you want without being homeless.
Right, right, right. How do commissions come about? I've talked to artists before. I've never talked to somebody about how that, I mean, is it through a dealer? Is it somebody reaches out to you?
No, I'm not represented by anyone. I have people who work on jobs, and if they get me the job, they'll get a cut. But in general, most of my commissions are people who Instagram, DM me, or send me an email.
Yeah.
And then we just work it out from there. And that goes from businesses to private residences.
And when you're doing that, they've obviously like your style, like the stuff you do, and they want that. Is the back and forth, what you said, just the working it out, is that both, I mean, you don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer. Is that both the financial terms, but also the, like, hey, what are you thinking for your, wherever this is going to go? Or do they come in and say, no, this is where we want it, and you do what you want to do?
I feel like I'm really lucky in that I have such a laser pointed thing I do. I don't have the most diverse portfolio. If you're hiring me, there's a certain aesthetic that you like about it. And so in general, when people hire me, they give me a pretty wide range to do what I want, within reason, of course.
And then do you spend time with them in the sense of, like, you want to know who they are, you want to know wherever this space is. It's a space that's going to have a lot of kids. It's a space that's going to be a nightclub. Does that have influence, or no, you kind of have, that space is irrelevant, the use of that space and the people who are there are irrelevant to what you're doing? It
depends on the space.
Okay.
It depends on the space. When I painted at St. Jude's, obviously I took the space into consideration a lot. Other restaurants and outdoor walls, I'll take less into consideration. It just depends on who's commissioning me and how much they say up front. Some people have a lot more to do with their projects. Some people want to be really hands off.
Yeah.
I'm kind of up for either.
Yeah. And you had a show, we were talking before we started here, you had a bunch of people in town. Talk about the show.
Iliad. It's a retelling of Homer's Iliad, kind of taking place in the southernmost bayous of Mississippi. It's just a way of talking about Southern masculinity, Southern fatalism, and like how it impacts the lives of men trying to be heroic, maybe for like misguided reasons.
Right. Right. And that where is it for people who?
It's at Crosstown Arts in the East Gallery.
In the East Gallery. Just a reminder, this is The Sidebar. I'm Eric Barnes. And The Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30, focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show, though. It's one of a number of weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, the Memphis Tigers podcast, and our food podcast, Sound Bites with Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield, which also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11. All of our podcasts, including The Sidebar, are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get this show and the food podcast Soundbites at WYXR or the WYXR app. That includes all the shows on WYXR, including the talk shows and archives of all the music shows. Also, do consider becoming a member or supporter of WYXR. It's nonprofit, listener-supported radio. And if you're not a subscriber to the Daily Memphian, please do subscribe. Read us. You can go to the Daily Memphian and subscribe right now. Recently, we were talking about urban arts. Lakeisha Edwards, the relatively new executive director of urban arts, was on. We also had Rory Thomas from the Memphis Medical District. Do you have anything in the Memphis Medical District that I can think of?
I don't think so. It's hard to know where districts lay.
Yeah. I was just trying to think if there was one that I was just totally missing. There's some very cool street art and murals and such in the medical district. But we had Rory on talking about all kinds of things that they've got going on, and we also had Serena Wages, the singer-songwriter, talking about her forthcoming album. Those were all recently, and you can get those wherever you get your podcasts. We think soon we've got Lauren Kennedy. We announced she was going to be on. She's coming in March. She had to reschedule. She just opened a gallery in the medical district, used to be head of urban arts in Memphis. We also do Behind the Headlines with the good folks over at WKNO every week. We, coming up, I think this week will be part 2 of our interview with Paul Young, with the new mayor. We did a 2-part interview with him over on WKNO. We also recently had Steve Mulroy, the district attorney, on Behind the Headlines. You can get that at WKNO.org. You can watch it on TV. You can go to YouTube or the Daily Memphian. Last bit of business is our Women in Business seminar. Well, this is coming up, right? Because there's a time lag here. So I'm looking at Natalie Van Gundy. Okay, it's coming up. So Women in Business Seminar is February 28th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. Just go to next Wednesday. Okay, next Wednesday in the time warp that is my life right now. The Botanic Garden, you can go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian. You can get tickets to that. Carol Coletta, Pat Mitchell-Worley, and Chloe Sexton of Bluff Cakes will all be there. Again, that's February 28th at 3:30. But we are here with Michael Roy, the artist Birdcap. This is dumb questions, but so bear with me, is working on things so large. It was interesting reading your bio that your dad was in construction. You talked about digging ditches. I mean, you came out of a bit of a construction family, and actually the scale of what you're doing and the kind of work you do, I think just in the little bio that I had, you compare the two, construction and the type of art. I mean, how do you do big art like that? I mean, I know that sounds dumb, but for those of us who can't do art of any size, it's always fascinating to know how people work.
Practice.
Yeah.
I think you get a sense, any construction job, it just takes learning the craft. There's a lot of methods to it. You can use a scribble grid to go large, you can use a projector, you can freehand it. I've done any way you can get a mural large. I've done that in my career.
Yeah. And you're mostly now painting with, is it spray paint? Is it rollers? Is it?
Mostly spray paint.
Mostly spray paint.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a way in which your stuff looks effortless, but you just talked about learning and learning and learning. It is, I assume, not effortless.
I don't know.
I mean, you mess up, I'm sure, or do you? I should pose it as a question. I mean, there are moments of frustration, I assume, or because they're so intricate. And there's just something, even the dark ones with dark themes are still, there's a certain amount of, like you said, like whimsicalness. And I think that belies how much work probably goes into it and how much frustration there might be.
I hope so. The whole reason I like sort of the whimsical, cartoonish aesthetic is I think when you make something that looks dramatic and the content is dramatic, sometimes it turns people off where they're not willing to engage with it. I think by having something a little more inviting, you can talk about, heavier topics without it feeling overwrought. And painting is an incredible medium. So every mistake can be literally painted over. So you only have to paint it once correct. You can paint it 300 times wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And does that happen?
Sure. Yeah.
Even still.
Of course.
Yeah.
You get into the groove, and sometimes you'll feel like you're flying high for a while, and then other days it feels like the can is really not your friend, and everything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I paint really large scale cartoons, so it's not high stakes. Yeah.
Fair. Yeah. No, that's fair. Do you? I mentioned Serena Wages and her new album. I did a listening kind of conversation thing with her and Matt Ross-Spang, who is the producer, and Joe Restivo, the guitar player and co-writer of most of the songs. One thing that Matt Ross-Spang, who just won a couple more Grammys, talked about is it is so hard for him to go back and listen to albums he's produced or been engineering, because all he does is hear everything he wants to change. And so it kind of drives him nuts. Do you go through that? Do you look at things? I mean, you're in the big piece that's been in the Crosstown Arts space has been there 6 years now. Do you walk by it and go, why did I do that? Or do you see it in a different light, or et cetera,
I try really hard not to look too closely at any of my old work. I think it's natural to beat yourself up. I think if you're ever content with your work, you wouldn't produce maybe as voraciously as you need to survive in like a late capitalism. So I think the self-hatred is a very good fuel for making more work, trying to fix your mistakes.
Other things that I've not seen in person, but I saw on the website, are these mosaics. Is that a newer thing, or have you always done mosaics?
I played around with it during COVID. I've always really liked the aesthetic of it. And then when I was doing the show and so much of it was based in classical storytelling, I wanted an aesthetic that would match that content without me having to draw actual signifiers. So I don't have to do olive branches, and I don't have to, do certain Greek patterns for it to get across that it's supposed to be kind of in that world. And so I started making those this year, and then I did a mural festival in Pompeii, Italy in July, and I got to see a lot of the work in Naples and Herculaneum, and it was a major influence on the show for sure.
Yeah, I was in Italy this fall. I wasn't in Pompeii, but it is sort of an overwhelming place for art and murals, and it's just kind of overwhelming. I mean, but for you, do you look at it as just this magical land of all this inspiration, or how do you?
Yeah, it's surreal. It's like, those were my favorite things growing up, were stories about ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt. And so when you go there, it's like being able to walk into a movie set where it's like, it's like if you got to go to Gotham if you're a big Batman fan. It's surreal that it really exists, and it's exciting and overwhelming.
Yeah. You also said on your bio that the work is reminiscent of Saturday morning cartoons. Mostly, what cartoons are you talking about when you say Saturday morning cartoons? Because all that landscape has changed. There's like 17 cartoon networks, and it's not the same thing. I'm older than you, but when I was growing up, Saturday morning cartoons, if you missed them, you missed them, and it was just a ritual. You get up and you would watch Bugs Bunny, and you would watch all those, and they were magical and cool. Were you thinking of those or other sorts of Saturday morning cartoons?
For my time was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
I was crazy about those. I have an unhealthy plastic collection of like Ninja Turtle toys from the early 90s still. I'm really influenced by Nick cartoons, early versions of Nick cartoons like Wild Thornberrys, Doug Funny.
Ellie Van Gundy, very happy over here.
Yeah. Classy Katsupsko, like art production style. That was a major influence. I think when I was in college, I wanted to be this like abstract, like aggressive abstract painter, and my hand never really agreed with me. And I just like end up doing these shorthand cartoons. And I had a teacher tell me like I was fighting my hand and that I was going to be a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And I eventually came to terms with that.
Yeah, and that was at MCA.
That was at MCA.
You're the fourth or fifth person, I think, from Memphis College of Art that we've had on over the years. And it's just so sad to think about, and the loss of that as an institution.
It brought in so many people who would not be Memphians without it. Like, I wouldn't know about Memphis had it not been for the opportunities that MCA offered me to go to school there. And it's fun to represent Memphis now, but I do feel bad for future generations where like that magnetism of creatives to the city is gone.
Yeah. Other cities, other places? We've been focused about Memphis, but you have work where else has your work appeared? So we've talked about 2 cities, Memphis and Seoul. Where else?
I've been to a lot of places.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be boring to rattle them off, but
okay.
Probably about 25 countries and most major cities in the U.S.
Yeah. Where you've done work or you visited and kind of...
I've done murals.
Where you've done murals.
Yeah.
How many murals is that?
Too many.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
But you're working and your work, like you've alluded to it. I mean, not everyone living as an artist and producing great work is remotely paying for themselves. You know what I mean? I mean, you joked about being homeless if you don't do certain things, but I mean, that's not always, there's a lot of people who can't make ends meet, but obviously you've sort of cracked the code a bit.
You're only as good as your last cut. So we here right now. There was that Alien-esque quote that was, I battle for meat. If I don't win, I don't eat.
Yeah.
It feels like that constantly freelancing.
Yeah. You've done some product design, is that right? Or just
lots,
Lots. Okay, talk about like one thing again on the website. One is just there's a beer, not just like a Ghost River beer can and but talk about the difference of doing product design.
It's always fun to collaborate with brands. I think that's one of the good things about being taken less seriously by the art world, as being like a street artist, is that you're able to collaborate with products that get into actual people's hands. And I really enjoy that. I like getting tagged and seeing people using products that the designs are on. I've done skis, I've done marijuana packaging, I've done lots of microbrewery and beers, skateboards, and different t-shirt companies.
And how does
coffee
that
brands.
They reach out to you and say, hey, we love your work. We'd love to do a skateboard that features your stuff.
Just an email usually starts it off.
Yeah. And is that, again, apologies for the dumb questions. Are they doing a limited run or a set run of a certain style of skateboard? It's not a one-off skateboard with your design on it, I assume.
No, it's usually a limited run.
Okay.
So like we're coming out with Dark Matter Coffee is coming out with a bag for beans in Chicago, and they'll come out I think this spring, and it'll be out for 6 months maybe, and then they'll change up the cover art to it later on.
Yeah. Anime, I was thinking when I was looking at your work, and I bring this up way too much probably, but Hayao Miyazaki, I'm a huge fan of his movies, and I remember and you were talking about Saturday morning cartoons, and my kids grew up watching whatever they watched on Nick and all that. They're now in their 20s. But when they were little, at some point, I took them to see Howl's Moving Castle. I think that was the first one in the theater that we saw. And then they kind of got into it, and I had them all on Blu-ray. And the strange thing about Hayao Miyazaki movies, particularly, which can be very dark and there's just a lot of pain in them, subtext or explicitly of pain. No matter they'd have friends over, they'd have different friends over. If you put a Hayao Miyazaki, it didn't matter how much sugar they'd eaten, how long they'd been running around like lunatics, they would calm down. And I remember the kids who'd never seen it would eventually say something effective, what is this? I've never seen this.
Yeah.
That whole thing. And your work reminded me of that kind of intricate and seemingly effortless, but of course not effortless and all that. And I was thinking about that sort of calming effect that simplifies it, but it would have this calming effect on kids. They would just be immersed in it. And a lot of the themes, and I'm curious to turn this into a question, a lot of the themes in a Hayao Miyazaki movie were way too complicated for the kids to follow, but they weren't bored, right? And I think you get into some serious stuff in your murals and your work, but it also can be enjoyed at multiple levels, right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I appreciate that's high praise to even be related to him. I want my work to be a part of a larger thing. So I want you to see my work in context of my work, and there be world building. And I think that's what I like about a lot of illustration, like mythos, is you get to kind of build an atmosphere to exist in, and within that, you're sort of in a landscape, so you're allowed to kind of wander, and you can pick up what you want to pick up from it.
Yeah. Again, talking with Michael Roy, the artist Birdcap. The show in Crosstown is there till what?
April 28th.
April 28th. So people come to Crosstown Arts up on the second floor and see the exhibit, see more of your work, and go just to it's birdcap.com, right?
Birdcap.net.
Birdcap.net. Just Google Birdcap. And it's all your stuff. It's just really fascinating. We're about out of time, though. And the question I always try to ask people was and this will be fascinating, what was the first concert you went to?
Ninja Turtles Out of the Shell.
First concert? Did
Biloxi
they tour?
Coliseum. Yeah, they did. Sewer surfing and did a lot of good hits. We actually left halfway through. Shredder had beat the Ninja Turtles up, and it was like intermission. My grandpa was tired of it, and he just told me Shredder won. And I went home like destroyed. And I found out, I found a VHS of it when I was like 20 and found out there was a whole second half.
Yeah.
But that
How
was
old were you, give or take?
I was probably 6.
6.
Yeah.
What's the first first concert you went to where you bought your own ticket?
Aesop Rock.
Okay. Where was that?
Nashville.
In Nashville. Okay. Very cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I
People
appreciate
should go
y'all
check out
having
the
me.
show. And again, that is all the time. But reminder, the Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full podcast of the interview on the Daily Memphian site, WYXR, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to this podcast, become a subscriber to the Daily Memphian, support WYXR. But that is all the time we have. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.